Welcome to Parenting Unscripted. I am your host, Katie Collette, and I sure thank you for joining us. For Parenting Unscripted today, we have an absolutely wonderful episode. We know that many children got a new cell phone for the holidays or some sort of tech for Christmas. And when we talk about a new cell phone or starting social media, it's really an exciting time for kids, but it can also be a really stressful time for parents. So we need a little guidance through that today, yeah? So joining me today, we have none other than Dr. Heather Tedesco. She is a parenting psychologist, a true expert in all of this, and she's going to help us create some healthy digital habits for our kids. Dr. Tedesco, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Katie.
This is such an important conversation because my son, who is 12, thinks he knows much better than I when it comes to social media and really more just having a cell phone. So I'm so thrilled that we get to talk about this today. First of all, for those of us who are really holding off getting our kids cell phones, but we hear all the time, but all of my friends have a cell phone. What's your advice to parents who are trying to find out if their child's actually ready for a cell phone?
Yeah. It's a great question. And if you are in that position where your child does not have a phone yet, my biggest piece of advice is go slowly. This is something that, we really want to introduce thoughtfully, carefully, and it's so much harder to pull something back than to introduce it gradually. If you are to a point where you're thinking this might be appropriate for your child, you really want to be educated about the risks. There are a lot of ways that technology is changing childhood and changing kids' brains, and we want to make sure that we're being thoughtful and informed. We also need to really think about our own child because not every 12-year-old, for example, is developmentally the same. We want to make sure that our child has, kind of prerequisites around impulse control. We want to make sure that we understand how they are feeling socially and, kind of what their, kind of emotional regulation is like. And then we also want to kind of look at ourselves as parents. Before we offer something like a cell phone, it's a really great time to ask yourself, how are you doing in terms of being able to communicate well with your child? How are you doing with limit setting and follow through? All of those things are going to be really important for the rollout of a cell phone to go smoothly.
Boy, sometimes self-reflection can be one of the hardest things.
For
My
sure.
goodness, that's great advice, though. How about, children are going to want these cell phones, but they're losing everything right and left still. Like they leave a sweatshirt at a friend's house or they'll leave
Yeah.
their whole entire overnight bag. Are they really ready for a cell phone at that point? And should that be something we take into consideration?
I think for sure we should. That goes to knowing your child because you're right. Responsibility is an absolutely critical part of granting new freedoms and new privileges. And we want to make sure that our kids are ready for what we're offering them. We want to make sure that we have, kind of trained them appropriately, helped them learn how to be responsible. And, it may be that even if they get a phone, you probably want to start off with some pretty strict rules around where the phone can go, how a child is using it, what are your expectations, and making sure that you're helping them. We're not trying to trap our kids into making mistakes so that we can pull technology back. We're trying to educate and empower them and give them the practice that they need to be good users.
Absolutely. So how do we talk to our kids about properly using a cell phone? And is that conversation different with perhaps younger children versus older children?
I think it is for sure. The younger a child, the more we are sort of partnering with them in terms of ownership. And, we want to make sure that we're educating our kids and that we're sort of teaching them how to be responsible in little increments, that we, sort of offer them a little bit of a privilege and we monitor how they're doing with it. We always need to be communicating effectively. And that means that we want to be collaborating with them. We want to be discussing what's hard. We want to be discussing what, they might use help with. Again, we're not trying to be us versus them. We want to make sure that they see that we are, kind of helpful resources. When kids are older, when they're teenagers, they have that built-in drive for autonomy. They believe they know better. They aren't as open to our feedback and to our oversight, but we still have a crucial role. we want to make sure that we are collaborating with them in a kind of gradual empowerment and transfer of power. So it does look different depending on the age and stage of your child. But the fundamentals that technology is something to be treated with respect and caution. Sometimes I'll talk about it sort of like learning to drive a car, right? We have age limits for a driver's license for developmental reasons. And when we are teaching a child to drive, they have a lot of practice, a lot of oversight, and a very gradual rollout of freedom. And I think we can think about cell phones similarly.
I think that's a really great point too, to make that correlation between the two, because they're both transporting our children to very different places. And sometimes we can't always see where they're headed, but we want to be informed.
It's so true. And modern parenting, technology is an incredibly challenging thing to parent around. And we have a harder time sort of parenting around the things that we can't see, the dangers that we, kind of aren't right in front of our face. And so we tend to get more protective in real life and sometimes not as protective digitally as perhaps we should be.
Oh, that is very true. And speaking of being protective digitally, what would you say is the best approach to speaking to our children about the dangers of social media without really scaring them? Or is it okay to kind of make them a little scared about what could be on the other side of that screen?
It's so well asked because just like learning to drive, driver's ed courses do include information about tragic accidents. We don't want to shield our kids from real life. And so we do want them to be good consumers. We want them to learn themselves and what their own kind of temperament and, vulnerabilities as well as strengths are. And we want them to understand the way that technology operates, specifically social media, that is essentially designed to hijack our dopamine reward system. We don't want our kids to be freaked out. We want them to have an appropriate level of respect and also, again, empowerment so that they know what they can do in order to protect themselves and in order to be able to use technology effectively.
On the other side of this break, Dr. Tedesco, I want to talk to you about what specifically we should be talking to our children about when it comes to warning them about the dangers of social media. Yeah. So I hope everyone stays with us as we continue our conversation with Dr. Tedesco. We will be right back.
Whether you're already working in education or aspiring to, then say yes to NPS. Norfolk Public Schools are currently hiring in the following positions. NPS offers the highest salaries and sign-on bonuses in Hampton Roads, plus a work lifestyle you'll love. Say yes to NPS.
Welcome back to Parenting Unscripted, where we are continuing our conversation about creating healthy digital habits. And once again, to help us talk about this more in depth is Dr. Heather Tedesco. She is a parenting psychologist. And before we took the break here, Dr. Tedesco, we were talking about speaking to our children about properly using social media, properly using their cell phones and technology. What would you say are the main things, the main elements we really need to address with them when it comes to safely and properly using social media?
Yes. One of the biggest things that kids have a very hard time conceiving of, but it's mission critical to understand, is that there is no digital privacy. And so it feels like you're talking just to one person or a small group of friends the way that you would in real life. And yet we know as adults that that is not at all how things function. And yet, again, kids' brains, their sort of stage of brain development is such that they can't know that. And so we have to really impress upon that. One of the reasons why I recommend that parents do spot checks, have passwords, et cetera, and do things that sometimes may feel like they're encroaching on their kids' privacy is in part to show kids and remind kids that they don't actually have the kind of privacy that they think they have. Along those lines, we also want to really make sure that our kids understand that people out there in the internet are not always who they say they are, and that it is crucially important to limit their contact to people who they do know in real life. And, to be very wary, especially with younger kids, about who they are interacting with and how they are, kind of forming friend groups. And then there are the issues, the social issues that happen in real life but are magnified online. Things like, bullying behaviors. Things like, kids just being unkind, excluding one another. All of the basic, kind of learning how to interact with peers that's messy and difficult in real life is just magnified. There's de-individuation that happens when we're online, where people behave generally worse than they do when they're face to face. And so we really want to help our kids understand all of these sort of aspects of digital communication and interaction.
I think one of the more challenging conversations I've had to have with my son is explaining to him, and I say I, but my husband as well, he's very involved, was explaining to him, again, as a 12-year-old, when he's wanting a cell phone and we're saying no, we're explaining to him the importance of the responsibility of pictures. Kids can think they're being silly and they'll send a picture of themselves and, they're running around. You never know who can get those pictures and what they might want to do with those pictures. And again, you don't want to frighten him, but we felt like we did it the best we could, but it is Parenting Unscripted, so we had no script. And we just, kind of explained to him, hey, this is what could happen. So you have to be really careful about these pictures. Even if you think it's cute or fun or funny, it could come back to bite you.
Yes. Yes, those conversations are incredibly important, and being able to talk with our kids in a collaborative way. It's a natural thing for kids, especially when we sort of hold in our purview things that they desperately want, for them to feel like we're against them. And we want to really make sure that we're communicating with our kids that we're on their side and that we're sort of all against the way that this technology works that makes it potentially harmful and difficult. And so we want to make sure that our kids feel us as their allies. We want to be curious. We have a lot of answers, but we don't know everything. I don't know what it's like to be a 12-year-old boy in today's day and age. And, nor do you, although you know more than I do, since you have a child in that situation. We want to make sure that we are asking them questions frequently about what their experience is, what their wishes are, why, not just what do you want, but why do you want that? Sometimes we can come up with workarounds that allow us to mitigate the risks that we see and yet help our kids feel like they're getting the supports that they look for.
Absolutely. I think it's also important to learn more about the rules and to discuss the rules that we need to set with our children when it comes to how they use their cell phones, where that cell phone goes at night, how long they can be on their device. What are your thoughts and what's your advice for parents for best practices for the rules?
Yes, I have a lot of best practices because it is so important for us to provide the structure and the limits for our kids. Because again, this technology is designed for us not to want to let go of it. And so our kids can't be expected to, set their own rules and do a great job of limiting the technology, especially early on. So one of the absolute number one rules is to not let screens go into the bedroom overnight. I know that can be very difficult, but having a space where phones get garaged, where technology stays outside of the bedroom can mitigate a lot of problems. Otherwise, we want to make sure that our kids still have phone-free environments, tech-free environments, and we should be modeling this with them. Hypocrites are not influential, so we need to make sure that we are also doing these things. Dinner time, meals are a great time for everybody to be tech-free. If you're doing an activity together, watching a TV show, playing a game, doing a puzzle, make sure that, phones are not encroaching, that technology is not, kind of doing that multitask. We really want kids to end their screen time at least an hour before bedtime. It does, sort of amp them up like a stimulant. And so we need to make sure that we're, kind of creating those buffers. Again, as parents, we want to be able to set rules for our kids clearly, collaboratively. We want to write them down. We want to post them somewhere. That takes away some of the power struggle where it's like, us grabbing the devices out of their hands. Instead, we say, what are our rules? What does this say? We want to make sure that we're having check-ins and conversations with our kids where they feel like they have a voice to say, hey, this isn't working, or I need more of this, or I'm having a hard time with that. And then the last thing I'll just say is that kids are going to make mistakes. it is very difficult to learn how to do anything new, especially something that is inherently so motivating. And sometimes I know parents that I work with feel like their kids, they're like, doing it to them if they break a rule. And it's not. Our kids are trying and they're struggling. And the more that we can empathize with them rather than taking it personally, the more we'll be able to help them.
I think it's also just really wonderful for parents to realize that when you follow your own rules and
Yes.
set your cell phone aside, maybe at dinner time or when you're watching a show or a movie together as a family, you're letting your child know that you find them more important than you find your cell phone. And I think that's just a really nice quiet message that the kids will absolutely pick up on because they are more important to us than our technology, but sometimes it might not feel that way. On the other side of this break, we're going to talk more about social media. If there's any social media that really does get your stamp of approval, or if you're like, you know what, let's just steer clear of that for now until a certain age. I'd love to know what you have to say about that. So when we come back, we will address that. So stay with us. Welcome back to Parenting Unscripted, where we are speaking with our wonderful guest, Dr. Heather Tedesco, a parenting psychologist. We are moving now into the big conversation about social media. So, is there any form of social media that you say, this is okay for kids to use? Any that kind of gets your stamp of approval?
Yeah. I hate to say it, but it's hard for me to, responsibly give a stamp of approval to any social media when the research continues to show that there are a lot of risks. You may know that Australia has actually become the first country to ban social media for kids under 16, and Virginia has also instituted a law that requires allows parental controls
Right.
and attempts to limit social media use to an hour a day for kids under 16. All of this is not out of nowhere. It's because the research shows a significant increase in mental health issues, depression, anxiety, body dysmorphia, suicide, very scary things. And it has to do, again, not that social media itself does this, it's the interactions and the ways that our kids perceive themselves through those interactions that becomes dangerous. And so it goes back again to knowing your child and to offering this very carefully with significant oversight in the beginning while you assess how your child can respond. How well does your child interact? Sometimes I've had parents who are really surprised at, what they sort of feel like is their kids struggle with tone.
Yeah.
Or coming across, much meaner or harsher than they actually are in real life in a conversation. It's very hard to read emotion, in these things.
Yes.
And then also how kids receive the messages and the interactions that they're having. And if they are particularly susceptible to criticism or impulsive or, things that make it harder for them. So I think as parents, oversight is key. We should start off having our kids' passwords. We're representing to them the fact that this is not private.
Yes.
And it's good to say directly to your kids, if it's something you wouldn't want to say out loud in front of me, you should really question. That is likely something you should not be saying in a digital fashion where it is being recorded and kept. And so we can act as sort of the proxy for the future writ large in terms of how media can be used. The other things to look for in terms of what are the worst of social media, anything that promotes anonymity. We want to, again, make sure that anyone our kid is communicating with, they actually know in real life. If they're going to violate that rule, you want to be aware of it and you want to understand why. And we also want to make sure that our kids are, that they're not using those apps where things just quote unquote vanish.
Yeah.
Because kids get really comfortable thinking that things are disappearing, but we know they are not actually disappearing forever.
That's right. You can always, once it's out there, you can always find it. And I know that that's hard for kids and frankly, a lot of adults to understand. And if adults who have much more experience are still struggling with that fact, that our innocent kids just don't fully understand that either. Is there I feel like you've had a really nice approach there about, setting up knowing your child's password. How do you do all of this though without your child feeling like you are just fully violating their privacy?
Yeah. It all boils down to conversation and communication. Be transparent with your kids. Parents have legitimate concerns that are based in both research about, kind of social development, brain development, as well as this, new information that we're gleaning about the effect of using social media on kids. And so making it if you haven't introduced social media yet, this is just the price of admission. And, just letting your kids know that in order to have the privilege of such and such app, they have the requirement that they give you the password, and that you are, again, being transparent, that you will spot check and talk to them about it, because your goal is to teach them, to help and to support them. It is not to micromanage them. And so again, you want to make sure that they see you as an asset, not, as big brother. And, you also, if you can, friend your kids on different things, different social media platforms. I know there are workarounds to everything, but if you can encourage your kid to treat you as the wider world, and just the knowledge of you being there can sometimes help them. The other thing I will just mention is that as we are getting our kids into social media, we want to make sure that they have balance, because social media is not an adequate substitute for in real life social experiences. And kids are not able to discern the difference. And so it's sort of like, you don't get strong and healthy just eating junk food. And social media and technology is sort of the junk food of human interaction. And so we really want to fight for that balance and to put the limits up so that they don't get sort of lost in the digital world.
I think that junk food analogy is the way to go. That is such a great way to describe that. I also want to talk about screen time, super important. Yeah. I know when our child's been on his iPad for too long at home, if it's a rainy day and we're all napping and all of a sudden he's honestly so sweet, he'll just snap. And even he wonders why. We're like, okay, time to put that down. Let's go play a game. Let's do something together as a family. What are the signs that your kid has had too much screen time? And then what can you do to avoid that?
Yeah, you just gave the sort of the perfect sign, right? They're not themselves. They become more irritable. They become, whiny or whatever the case may be. And there's a reason for it. The neurochemical that is responsible for sort of reward and pleasure, dopamine, is what technology hijacks. It actually creates, it can create a habit. It can create a dependency. It can take motivation. And so the reason why social media, technology, games are so difficult for kids to stop using is because it affects their brain's, sort of drive and reward system. And when kids are on technology for too long and it keeps feeding them new little hits of either, feedback or next levels on games or what have you, it really interferes with their ability to find enjoyment in sort of the real life, sort of slower, more delayed gratification activities. And that is a huge danger. And so when you get that sense that your child has had a little too much, no worries, we just draw back. We want to, again, strive for that balance. And so if our kid's gone a little too far in the technology digital zone, then we want to take a little break. And tech vacations of, hours, days, even a weekend can be really useful for just resetting ourselves and our brain.
Oh, a tech vacation would be amazing. Dr. Tedesco, thank you so much for this very valuable conversation today. I know that I learned a lot. I know our viewers have learned a lot. We certainly appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, Katie.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us for this episode of Parenting Unscripted. Remember, you can watch new episodes of Parenting Unscripted every Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock right here on Wavy Plus. I know that you enjoyed this conversation today just as much as I did, and I hope you have a wonderful day.